So the next item that we have up on our agenda, now that we have returned from our brief break, is for the Wachusett Regional School District's annual budget presentation. And so I will hand the floor over to Superintendent Riley.
Good evening, everybody. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you about our schools, both the Paxton Center School and, of course, our greater district. Appreciate that the willingness and the partnership of the towns. I'll talk a little bit about where we are this year, but a big part of it is trying to forge those partnerships, trusting relationships with all the towns. And honestly, my first week in the district, I went over to Paxton Center School, and there was a special meeting to approve our security enhancements, and certainly appreciate the support of the town. And that really led us on the way to looking at that as an issue, honestly, as we went around to other schools this year. So thank you.
That was your first week.
Yeah, it was.
I apologize.
No,
you were on the spot.
Honestly, no. Are you kidding me? I'll show up anywhere where they're going to designate $50,000 for improving security in schools. So that was a wonderful welcoming. Certainly no complaints. So I wanted to, share a little bit about financial outlook, and I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. And please know this story is not meant to obscure the facts. It's more to just talk about what's going on in the district right now, and then hopefully to provide some data behind the requests we have this year in the school department. I think really if I was going to share one through line of my first year in the district, it would be school finances, in that we've inherited a very difficult situation in the district, and we're continuing to try to dig out of that. But we've set some financial goals, and I would just share with you all that really first and foremost, as superintendent, what I really try to do is advocate for what I think the students need. And so really to try to budget and to try to base those recommendations on data and best practice. So we'd really like to have this, but we're advocating for this, and this is why, and this is how the data supports what we're requesting. The other thing we're really working hard to do is to be accountable and transparent. I think everyone at this point knows the number of financial mistakes that have been made in the district over the last several years. And we really are at a position where we have to dig out of a lot of issues. And beyond that, we also have numerous systems that need to be upgraded in the school department. This sounds ludicrous, but I would share with you that we still depend on carbon copy paper sometimes, and a pile going from one desk to the next. So there's a great deal of human error still. We have too many single points of failure. And so there's still a great deal of work to do in the school department to get on the right track in terms of our financing. With that, though, what we're hoping to do is build some trust and healthy relationships with the towns. It may not seem it when I give this presentation, but I certainly realize the school department is not the only game in town. And so I know that. And our goal is certainly to be good partners with the towns, to understand it isn't a one-department system where it's just the school system. I'd like to do a few things. One is certainly look at uncovering untapped deficiencies. We spoke a little bit before the meeting, and the district has been pursuing grant opportunities. I'll share a few of them, as the presentation goes on. I think we also need to be looking at things that are in our budget right now where we can save money. And if I shared with you one of the great next steps for us as a district, it's to do just that. Okay, do we really need this? Is this the way we need to do it? Can we loosen up some funds if we do that? I don't always want it to be coming to the towns and saying we need an increase. Ideally, it'd be like, hey, we feel like we need a few more positions, but look at this. We've uncovered some money, and we're going to do this differently now, and we can support those teachers and not have an additional request. I'll freely admit to you, though, we're not there yet. And then finally, I think we're seeking to give the towns time to plan. We understand that when we come to the towns with a request, it's not as simple as, sure, let's just shift some money around, you can get whatever you want. We're very much invested in going into the strategic planning process, which we'll start to embark upon this spring. And we really hope there we're going to have a blueprint for where the district is going, what we're hoping to accomplish, and then a pathway on how to get there, and to finance how to get there, if that's necessary. But that's all work that needs to be done. And we're hoping and looking forward to starting to go down that process really this spring. So where are we as a district in terms of finances? We're not in a good place. And I would share with you one nice thing that I can share with you tonight is that first bullet point, our FY21 audit hadn't been completed, it is now. And so one of the things with Michelle Grise, who's with me tonight as our Director of Finance, Michelle's been able to complete the last parts of that, and that's in now to our auditors, and we've responded to their letter and given them some feedback. So we're in a much better spot, I should say, not in a good spot. But when I share with you an FY21 audit, that's incredible, right? The district, we were in, for a little while here, living in 4 fiscal years, creating an FY24 budget, living in FY23, and unable, and we still haven't closed out FY22, and then we had an audit from FY21. And these are things, by and large, that we inherited. When I came into the district in July, we had not balanced some of our bank reconciliations for, I think, close to 18 months, okay? When Michelle joined us at the end of November, I still didn't, to be honest with you, realize the depth of all the things that needed to be fixed in our finance department. And within 1 week of Michelle being in her position, she approached me and she said, Jim, we got to talk because we need to put in place a spending freeze. And so she was so worried about how we had developed our FY23 budget that we certainly didn't want to get into a position like we had in FY22 where we had overspent what our budget was. And that was the first alarm for me when I came in. At our first school committee meeting in July, we voted transfers from a lot of our revolving accounts to balance what was estimated at that time of over expenditures of $1.65 million, okay? And that was concerning not only because we went over the budget, but the way we balanced it, or on paper balanced it, was we used our revolving accounts. And revolving accounts are important, and you should access them and you should spend them down, but when you don't have any more safety nets, if that happened to us again this year, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And certainly thankful that when Michelle came in, she said, look, this is the time for us to stop freezing, to understand where we were, and we don't, recommit the sins of the past. And so was thankful for her input on that, and I think it made a difference. And I think so far, we feel like we're doing okay in FY23, and we shouldn't be going down the same path we did the year before. But there were concerns there, because the FY23 budget was built on a process they did in FY22. And a lot of the calculations, and Michelle will talk about this, were done in ways where it wasn't based on true expenditures. Okay, so our salary line appears to just have been multiplied by 3%, where teacher salaries in the contract, they have things like steps and COLAs and other things that need to be considered when you're looking at that calculations. They have lane changes, and so there are a lot of variables that if you don't go in and try to do it correctly, you're asking for some issues. I think the other thing that was concerning to us is a lot of the areas where we had overexpended in FY22, and those would be specifically salaries, our substitute costs, and our facilities. They did not have an adjustment in those line items in the FY23 budget. And so looking at that, there was concern like we're going to be on track to be in the same exact place if we don't take some action. The good news I'd share with all of you is that Michelle has created this budget to the best of her ability on actual expenditures. So looking at what we spent in FY22, looking at what we spent for true expenditures in FY23 thus far, we have a far higher level of confidence that these are more in line with what we need to operate, and a true accounting of what our actual expenses would be. But the stakes are high. I'll share with you, Michelle and I have a standing appointment every Friday with DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, with the Department of Revenue, and with our auditors, which are currently Markham and formerly Melanson. And we meet at those meetings to give them updates about where we are in the process. You know, we were able to report that we finished our 21 audit, but we still haven't closed out FY22. And we're very fortunate. And I say we're very fortunate, it's not because of myself, it might be because of Michelle, but it is because we have new people in our positions, because I think the district would probably be in a great deal of trouble if they didn't have new people in our seats. I think we've been given some grace by DESI and DOR to try to fix the mess we're in. But it's a mess. And in a lot of ways, we're very lucky. We haven't had our Chapter 70 funding and other things touched. Right now, they've been very supportive and working with us. But, you know, the fact that we're meeting with them weekly kind of speaks to the fact that they're viewing it and we're viewing it as a very serious situation. So we did try to go through a more open, dynamic budget process where we were hoping to go. I'd share with you that both Michelle and I are where we want to be in terms of budget development, not even close. This is what we could do at this point in time as we're trying to dig out of where we are. But we did a couple of things that we feel like are important steps forward. We had a budget retreat with the school committee for the first time, I think in about 5 years, where we were able to really talk about what's going on in the district, what our intended thoughts were about how we were going to develop the budget, and then also get feedback from school committee members about, you know, what they thought were some of the more important issues that we addressed or could address at this point in time. I think the other thing we were doing in the interest of transparency is we shared all the requests from schools and departments publicly, you know, with the school committee. You'll see some of those positions actually in this budget presentation. And I think before, if you talk to principals or department heads, I think a lot of times they kind of felt like whatever requests they sent in kind of went to a black hole, and they weren't seen, they weren't heard, they weren't really even acknowledged. And we were doing our best to acknowledge them and say, yeah, these are things that we're going to look in, we need to look into and try to fund. We're not at that point yet. One of the slides I'll show you is that we really haven't funded most of those requests because there's a lot of work to do before we can commit to some of those items. I would share, though, that I look at a lot of the items that principals have put forth or department heads, and I say, yep, I can understand that why that would be important to you. So I don't think a lot of them were frivolous, but we weren't at a point in time where we could support them. Because a lot of the work the district needs is to become better aligned and doing similar things, best practices at all our schools. Right now, I talked about it when I talked to the staff on opening day. We're really 5 towns, 13 schools, and we should be just one district. We really should establish, okay, this is the best way of doing things, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we can fund it. But we're not there yet, and we really are a ways off, but that's where we need to be headed. I talked about, Michelle, creating the budget on actual expenditures, and the last thing I'd say is we do appreciate the partnership of the towns, and I said it was kind of ironic that I was going to say that and that we understood we're not the only game in town, because I'm going to come to you with a request that's more than 4%, and all the towns told us keep it to 4%, that's what we can handle, otherwise it's going to be difficult for us. And but it did appreciate, Heather and the other town administrators coming forth and saying this is what we can afford, and this is what we feel like the budget can support reasonably. We came forth, or I've led to come forth with this budget, and school committee supported it because this is what we truly feel like we need to operate. And we're hoping in some ways that number may potentially come down. I didn't mention earlier, but one of the very real consequences of where the district is at financially is we don't have our E&D certified. And so because we haven't closed out FY22, we haven't been able to have our excess and deficiency certified. And because of that, that's something that traditionally is put down as a revenue source for the budget, and we haven't been able to do that thus far. We're not sure where that is. We are working very hard on that happening. We feel like if we can get there and it can get approved by school committee, that might be able to relieve some of the assessment on the towns, but we're not in a position where we could promise that at this time. But we do want to acknowledge it's not included in this budget, and we have to own that. That really is the biggest consequence. Yes, sir.
With regards to that, you make an excellent point. Do you have any kind of targeted timetable for 2022?
So right now, what we're operating.
She smiles.
Well, because it's good that I'm 5 feet away from her right now. Right now, when we're operating with DESI, they've originally had said March. They worked with us and then mentioned April. Right now, we're operating under the premise that we'll be trying to get it done by April 15th. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure we may have to ask them for another extension beyond that. And we really are, there's so much going on, and I think Michelle and I are very cognizant of not making promises. And so right now it's the 15th. I would say, and Michelle will have a better hold on this, I'm not sure we're going to be ready by the 15th. I know it's one of our top priorities, and it's why we're putting that out to everybody.
Coming from a very budget-conscious background and being pragmatic, as I try to be, give us what you feel to be a realistic timeline for 2022, taking into consideration that you would want some sort of contingency factor for those things that are unknown. So you're saying April 15th, and you're probably not going to make that.
I think most
Is
of
May 1 realistic? Is 2 weeks later May realistic?
Yeah.
Are we talking 30 days later?
Well, I'm hoping that I'll get end of year report, which is, I have to do that first to get to DESI by middle of April, and then I'll switch gears and hopefully get right. I have to be able to close the books. And so I'm just trying to get the timing of Munis to be able to come in and assist with, because I have no idea how to close Munis. For them to come in on a weekend, close them, and then the E&D certification should hopefully only take a couple days. And then it just depends how quickly they certify. So there's some turnaround time with them. So I think realistically, we're probably looking at end of April, beginning of May.
Okay, thank you.
Give or take.
Caveat.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
My question was all, was.
It was
Yeah. Yeah.
totally
What's your
appropriate.
target, what your
Yeah.
realistic target is?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And so when we went through that process, what we tried to look at is what are our essential needs really going into this fiscal year. And we identified a couple of levers. One was to try to make some class size adjustments. The school committee has a policy, and I'll share with you that the district is extremely dependent on your classroom teachers. And so one of the things that was noticeable to me when I came from another district was we don't have a lot of systems that are typically in place in school districts. Okay, we don't have reading specialists. If a school is fortunate enough to be eligible for Title I services, then we might have a tutor who supports learning in those schools. But otherwise, it really is classroom teacher, potentially district-wide program, or special education. We don't have a lot of other things to help kids when they might be struggling. And because of that, it's especially important to try to look at your class sizes. And I'll show some of the data that we looked at, and really all the recommendations we made were clear examples that we were out of compliance with class sizes. And what compounded that a little bit this year is because we didn't have a budget that we had confidence in. Some of the classrooms where we would have made recommendations for a class size and adjustment, we weren't able to accommodate this year because we simply didn't have the money in the budget. And so you had a couple of years kind of built up there where there were some cohorts of kids that the class sizes were going to be quite high. Paxton Center is one of the classrooms where we're requesting an adjustment, and if we don't make the adjustment, their class size is going to be 30. And clearly that's at a level that it's going to impact all the kids in that school or in that class if we don't make that adjustment. The other thing that we were really looking at is inequities amongst schools. So we have a couple schools I was talking about really where right now we're 5 towns, 13 schools. We had a couple schools that had some things and other schools that didn't. And in some cases, 12 schools would have one thing and 2 schools wouldn't. So we tried to make a couple of recommendations around those things too, where we could clearly see, okay, this is an inequity. The other thing we focused on was curriculum. And so there's a lot of talk about Fontes and Pinnell, the district-wide program, even up here at Paxton Center, a lot of kids who are struggling with reading. The primary program we use for English language arts in our elementary grades does not, by the research, it's, some people believe, potentially even harmful to kids in how they're learning to read. And so that became an accelerated need for the district, supported by school committee, the education subcommittee. We're making a recommendation that we replace that program sooner than later. Really well documented with research right now. The state, and we're hoping that we'll be eligible for this next year, has been having some grant programs to replace the program. And so we're hoping that that will help us potentially. Right now, we're on track to select a new program for K-2. We're hoping if we potentially can get some grant support to make that K-5, and then we would implement that program the following year. But typically, we wouldn't be looking at a new program for another few years. But the feeling is, and the research says, that this is what's going to be best for kids. And I think you always want to get into a situation where you're proactively giving kids the education you want. You don't want to be doing harm, especially at any age, but really when you look K-3, K-4, these are really important years for kids when they're learning how to read. And so you want to make those adjustments early, and you don't want to be relying on getting supplemental services or providing additional supports all the way through high school just to get kids over that last hurdle. You'd much rather do it early with, your tier 1 or your basic instruction. And so that's what we're aiming for, and that's what we're trying to do. The other thing is, I can share with you right now, the curriculum department in the district is incredibly small. And so we have one person who helps support Title I, and then half of the duties for the deputy superintendent is to support curriculum. I came from a district where it was smaller than this, and it was Leominster, and they had 6 or 7 people in their curriculum department. And so we desperately need help. And especially if we're going to be changing from Fontes and Pinnell, we're going to want additional supports to support those teachers with that change. It's one of the things, and we're going to talk a little bit about the scope of the district, but when you do have 13 schools, and it's interesting to me, 155 square miles is how big Wachusett is. We're the 25th largest district in the state. And so when you're that big, you really do, if you're going to effectively work with teachers, you need to have the resources to be able to do it properly. And then the last thing I'd share that we identified fairly early, and honestly that was very truthfully in part in some of the earliest days in Paxton, was our need for security at our facilities. The safety and our Safety and Facilities Subcommittee for the district, we went and visited every single building over the summer and took a look at what our needs were. And one of the glaring things we did find was we had a lot of outdated systems, and we needed to work on locks, cameras, fobs to gain entry, a lot of key systems where we had lost control over the years of maintaining the security of those systems. And so it became a really kind of clear need for us moving forward, and some of the work and development and quotes that they got over at Paxton have kind of set the stage for the work to happen, hopefully, at other schools moving forward this summer. The other thing we noticed is the age of a lot of our buildings, and they really are getting to a critical stage where it's not even necessarily from misuse. It's just because after about 25 years, you're going to start looking at boiler systems, windows, and roofs. And so, we've updated the capital plan, and right now, the Mass Building Authority doesn't have an accelerated repair program. They've put that on hold to try to finance new schools because it's become so expensive. But we're hoping that that program is going to gain support again and come back, and we'll be prepared when, say, Paxton Center needs one of those things to come forth, say, we believe we can get an accelerated repair program, and then the return on investment for the towns is much higher. You can be looking for more than 60%, I believe, to get on your return, and it doesn't become just a capital improvement project that has to be financed on its own in isolation. It'll get support from that program, and ideally, we'll be communicating, hey, in a couple of years, we think we've become eligible here, and we can communicate that to towns, we can plan, we can find out if we'd have the financing and move forward with some of those projects. And then the last piece I'd say that the district needs to own is we haven't done as much preventative maintenance as we really need to. I think a lot of times in districts with your budget, the first thing that does get cut is your facilities line, but it's not really cost supportive. It's not the smartest way to spend, because then you're waiting for things to have critical failure and you have to replace them. And so that's something I think we're looking to make a more sound investment in, is trying to make sure we're doing our part as a district to pay for some of the preventative maintenance that hasn't always been happening in the past. And so what I want to share with all of you is that's what we've tried to build into this budget. But speaking as a superintendent who's near here, it's not all that we need. I shared earlier, I worry about how we're built to support students. I feel like the needs of our students right now, especially after the last 3 years, they're higher than they've ever been. You know, I know I have 2 girls, 8th grade and a sophomore, and most of the time they're pretty good kids, I guess, overall. But, you know, the pandemic's hurt them. You know, you can see it. You can see, and you know, kids aren't the same. I know none of us are probably the same. I know I'm not after the last 3 years. So you worry about them. And then no matter how good remote learning may have been, it's not the same as being in person. And so a lot of our kids have learning gaps, and that wasn't traditional before in Wachusett. One of the nice things about Wachusett is you had kids who came in a lot of times and they were ready. They had some pre-literacy skills and they were ready to learn and to take off. But when you look at what any child's been through the last 3 years, they're not there. And they're going to need support. And I'd share with you all that's starting to be reflected in their data. I can even look at the data that was taken last year, and we're closer to the state than we usually are. And some of our gaps, I'll tell you, one of our biggest needs is our high needs population, which is made up of your English learners, your special education students, and then also your students from lower socioeconomic status families, okay? And that subgroup in particular is really struggling. And those are kids who, you know, they deserve our support. And so we've got to find ways that are going to help get those kids kind of over the hump. And part of that is trying to find, okay, what do we need for a student who may not be eligible for special education, but they need some help? We had to find a way to help them out. And so those are some of the things I think we're looking to develop in a strategic plan. The other thing, and I'll share some data about this, is guidance. We're very low on the number of guidance counselors that we have. You know, on average, we have a 0.5 guidance counselor in our elementary schools. And, you know, I think the model you'd see far more often in districts is about 1 in every elementary school. And so that's a need, because what happens is if you're 0.5, you may not even have somebody every day in the building to help support a crisis, and you're not getting to the kind of proactive, supportive things where the guidance counselor knows all the kids in school instead of the 15 kids or 25 kids who are really struggling. And ideally, that's the way you'd love to be able to run a guidance program. And then also health teachers. We don't have health teachers, and honestly, in a lot of schools, or most districts in Massachusetts, you're going to have health teachers, and it's an important part of kids as they're growing up to have that support. And right now, we don't have it in district. And I'm not saying we need all this stuff next year. I'm saying that these are things that I still notice we don't have, and those are things that we're hopeful to going to be looking at in a strategic plan about, okay, you know, are these important positions for the district? Is there another way to cover this, or is this something we really should work towards making part of the Wachusett school experience moving forward? And those are questions that still need to be answered. Special education. I've said this in a lot of our presentations. Special education is a huge need in the district, in that if we have a vision for special education, I'm not sure what it is. And so we have a bunch of different models that we do a little bit. We do team teaching a little bit. You know, we may do some support with paraprofessionals a little bit. We may do some inclusion, but not full the way. And so we really do need to develop that. What does it mean? How are we going to service kids? Maybe it's a blend of all those models, but we have to find a way to communicate that and commit to it, because right now we seem to be doing a lot of little different things in isolation. And it gets back to when I talked about alignment, you know, ideally how you support your kids in your special education program, even though it may look a little bit different in a you know, K-8 like Paxton Center, it shouldn't look so different from what we're doing, say, if there's an elementary model like they have in Rutland or Holden. You know, they should be similar principles, and we should be following a similar way of trying to support the kids. So when they get to the high school, it's not, you know, well, you went to Paxton, you do it this way, and you went to Princeton, so you do it this way. No, we all do it the way Wachusett does it, and it's successful. That's what we're trying to do. Expanded pathways right now, and we actually have a nice at school committee on Monday. There'll be a presentation. We just got a grant, or the teachers really got a grant, where we're going to be supporting some additional pathways at the high school level where kids can pursue areas of interest that they may not otherwise be exposed to at the high school level. I mean, we're so big, the high school is such a big place that really whatever we can do to get kids interested in going and attending school and feeling like they're learning about something they're truly interested in, I think we should be doing that homework and trying to do what we can. Space limitations, not as much to my knowledge in Paxton, although we are reaching out to all our town planners, but some of our towns are really struggling with population growth. And then we have other towns where it's staying constant and actually going down a little bit. We have to be asking ourselves, what are the answers to that? You know, so schools that maybe have declining populations are adequately staffed and get the support and can provide the experience we want all kids to have. And then communities that are growing, either they are planning for adding additional space, or maybe there's a way for them to be folded into some of our other community schools. But we have to start asking those questions and coming up with solutions. And then, as I mentioned before, a lot of capital improvements that we're looking to move on from, just because some of our buildings are old and some of them are going to need a little TLC. So just an overview on our funding. I usually get boos when I do this part of the presentation, but really, and I just want to tell you why I have this up here, is per pupil expenditure is a metric that they use by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And I have it here really purely as a comparative metric, and so it does inform us a little bit about where we stand in comparison to other school districts in the state. And so I certainly will not claim it's the perfect metric or always makes sense. However, what I will say is where Wachusett stands up is very much near the bottom. And I think it's important to take note of that. And all the data that I'm going to share with you today is from FY21. And it's FY21 because they don't have FY22 out yet. We'll have that next year. And so it's always a couple of years behind. I would also share that Wachusett's pure pupil expenditure went up. And so it's actually heading up. And so that's the good news. But right now, and for the most recent data we have, FY21, we were 364 out of 398 districts. I think the other challenge about funding in our towns is that the state funding formulas, they can have substantial and inconsistent changes in what a district's share of the minimal local contribution is. And so the state can look at a town like Paxton and say, well, we feel like you can afford more based on these metrics, and then Paxton's share is going to end up going up just because of that calculation or determination by the state. That isn't something that we have control over, but certainly has an impact on a town's assessment. And then one final thing I wanted to share is our member towns have been very supportive of our budget, and we thank you for that. I think one thing the district has to own is if the district wasn't advocating or truly capturing what their expenses were, that's on the district. And that's one reason why we're trying to come forth and say, hey, this is what it really costs to run the Wachusett schools, because I'm not sure that's happened the last couple of years. And I know that the towns have passed the budgets that were requested, and that's not the town's responsibility, that's the district's responsibility if we didn't capture our costs in the right way. And so just a little bit more about per pupil expenditure. As I said, it's not a perfect metric, but it is a comparative data piece. I'll say it's where it's not, or it can be funny, is per pupil expenditure grants, and then also like if you're a community that receives a higher level of state funding, that goes into per pupil too. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the community is spending much less on their schools. It's not a true apple to apple. It's not a level playing field, and I want to acknowledge that. And I believe they also look at where the district spends their money, and that's a piece, again, that we need to look at. You know, are some of our expenses maybe going in the wrong place, and they're not being seen as benefiting students as much as they could. And so that's a piece that we need to look at as well. And I definitely would want to say there's nothing about pure pupil expenditure that was used to build this budget. None of the numbers we came up with were because we wanted a certain per pupil expenditure or to increase it. It was simply based on what we spent over the last couple of fiscal years and what we felt we needed to advocate for in terms of additional positions. And so just a look at where we stack up in Wachusett in terms of per pupil expenditure. We're in the green. This is in fiscal year 21. We spent $15,412 per pupil. We took our DART peer average. DART schools are ones that are close to us in terms of the demographics of the student population, makeup of the town, economy, and other matters around that. And they usually use us to compare to them about achievement data. But we took the average of our DART peers, and they spend about $2,000 roughly per student more. If you take all our other regional school peers who have K-12 programs like we do, they spend an average per pupil expenditure about $3,000 more, and the state average is about $4,000 more. And then I just threw in BayPath and Monty Tech. Those are different models, but their per pupil expenditure is also much higher than what we're currently expending in Wachusett. And so why does that matter? It matters because with close to 7,000 students, an additional 2,000 students in per pupil expenditure is more than $13 million. And that would be if we increased it to our DART peer average. If we were at a per pupil expenditure similar to our K-12 regional average, it'd be an additional $3,000, and that'd be an additional $20 million effectively in the budget. I'm just trying to start the conversation. I'm not asking for $13 million. I'm not going to be asking for $20 million, obviously. It's just the idea that at some point we may have to look at what our budget for the schools is actually allowing us to put in place for kids, and to have the conversation about, do our kids potentially need some things that they're not getting right now? That's the spirit it's offered in. Because when you have inadequate funding, all right, some kids who are placed at risk, they're not going to get what they need. And I am very much worried about that in our current context, in our kids, given what they've been through the last couple of years. And so this is just another quick comparison. We are the 25th largest district in the state, and if you look at our per pupil expenditure, it's the smallest of those 25. And so sometimes people think that because you're a larger district, you may have some efficiencies and things like that. And certainly as a regional, we've never gotten the gift of fully funded transportation. And then I would also share that we seem to be in the great middle here. We're not small enough, so we don't benefit from rural money in some of our communities when they otherwise might. We're not urban enough or have the right demographics to benefit from like the Student Opportunity Act or other things. We don't get qualified for a lot of the grant programs that other districts will. So we don't get a lot of the resources that I really wish we would get. And I think that's where a piece of advocacy certainly comes into play. We need to continue to work with our legislators to say, don't forget about us. You know, we need support too. But right now, compared to those other 25 districts, we're not getting supported to the same level. And so just a final word about town assessments and how they were determined. The first thing that happened is town shares of the minimal net school spending were established by the state. Those are the absolute minimum each community has to legally contribute to the school system. The percentage of what each town pays of that number, that's determined by the state. Student enrollment by town. So if a town is sending more students to the Wachusett School District by a regional agreement, they are going to spend a larger proportion of money that year in the budget. And then the last one is discretionary funding. And I want to be clear, all of our towns support the schools more than they have to. A great deal more than they have to. And I think that's important to note. It's not like the towns are turning their back on the education system. That's not true at all. I think, we are requesting discretionary funding. It's millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. And so I do want to acknowledge that because I think it's important to state that and say we do appreciate the support we've gotten from all of our towns. We are calling it discretionary. I think in the past you saw it as operational. It's really discretionary. Like you don't have to do it. And so we're just trying to be clear about that. Some acknowledgements. The governor's budget, when it was released in February of this year, it includes additional Chapter 70 money, which was great for us. It also increased the transportation aid for the school district, and that was also wonderful news. Minimal local contributions, they've increased for all the towns, and I think that's hard, and it's one of the reasons why all the assessments have gone up. And the revenues in our draft budget, as I mentioned earlier, they don't include excess and deficiency at this time, and we just wanted to be clear that we own part of that shortfall. So a little bit about the district, because I think it's easy to forget. We have such nice towns, but they're not huge, right? And so you don't think about how big the school district really is. We're gigantic. 6,739 students was what we recorded during our SIMS report in October. Geographical area I mentioned earlier, 155 square miles, just a really expansive area that we cover. We're the 25th largest district overall in terms of enrollment, so we're in the top 6%, 13 schools, 5 towns. We have 1,400 active employees. Those are all positions, so that includes things like coaches and maybe stipends or other pieces. We have 469 teaching positions, a total of 1,079 FTEs, so those are full-time equivalents, just basically we had all full-time positions. And we have 881 district resident employees, which I think is kind of nice. So 881 of those employees are 631 of the FTEs. They're people who live in one of our 5 communities, which I think is a nice because it's, true, they certainly care about the kids in the towns, and I think it's, as such a large employer, it's nice that we're also employing people in our communities. A district enrollment update, and we're highlighted here in Paxton. We grew by 1 student. We went from 634 on the October 21 SIMS data to 635, and so an enrollment change of 1. At the high school, we actually lost 4 students. And so when I talk about pathways and other things, those are questions we should be asking ourselves, Why did we lose those 4 students? And not that, and I think the vocational schools are wonderful, and so if that's where a child's particular interest is, I would want them to go there. But I think we always have to ask ourselves, is our high school, is it attractive to our students when they get to that age? Because clearly it's important that we try to hold on to kids and give them the experience that they're hoping for in their families. And so in FY24, this budget, what does it include? It includes 8 positions, 8 teaching positions for class size adjustments that I'm going to go into. It includes 1 English learner or education teacher, 2 counselors, a curriculum director, a new K-12 ELA program, which is the replacement of Fontes and Pinnell, and then the Early Childhood Center is a district program where we take kids from Paxton, all 5 of our communities, to service them between the ages of 3 and 5 if they are eligible for special education. That's attached to our central office, and that building needs a lot of TLC. I will share with you that the rugs have been there between 15 and 20 years. They're horrid. We need to try to replace them. The kids deserve a clean, safe place to go to preschool, and so we're advocating for that. It's also the only place in the district that doesn't have a generator. You've got your youngest learners, and then on our side, on the central office side, all of our computer equipment runs through that building. When we had a tree fall earlier this year and took out the power, we had about 90 minutes on backup, but then had to call, I'd say roughly 3/4 of our schools because they were going to lose their internet because it funnels through that system. So it's a pretty important security need, and we built that into the budget. That's not a request of towns, but that's included in the budget that we're going to, if it gets approved, we'll be able to put those improvements in place. And so just a quick example of the class size adjustments that we're recommending. Paxton Center is highlighted in yellow. In grade 1, the recommended class size by school committee is 19. If we didn't make an adjustment this year at Paxton Center School, they'd be faced with first grade classrooms of 30, and that's asking for trouble. And so,
does that reflect what's the current state now?
If we did not add a classroom,
Right.
both.
You're right at about 30 right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not this year. So this will be the kindergarten group going into first grade.
Right.
And right now, the kindergarten group, I'd have to look it up to, it's less than that because they have more sections. With Paxton Center, a lot of the grade levels are just going to have 2 teachers in them, and sometimes I think this one's going to go to 3. And so it's one of the harder things when you have smaller schools, like I was talking a little bit about Thomas Prince and Paxton Center, and then lesser extent the Sterling schools, is if you get in an influx of students or you have a particularly large cohort, it makes a huge difference. And like this is one of those examples, like, if we can get them to 20, it's going to make a big difference for those kids. First grade's a challenging grade because kindergarten, you typically have a paraprofessional, and so they lose the paraprofessional, and now they're really getting going. So God bless first grade teachers. So that's an example, and all the other ones on here too. And let me, just to be clear, if we got an influx of additional students, we'd reshuffle this list. Right now, the Paxton Center School, nobody approaches 30. We have a couple at 28. So I know that's going to be one of the recommendations that happen. But it's not that if the budget gets approved, we're going to hire definitely for all these positions. We'd look at what our census was in all our schools. We'd run this analysis again, and we'd make the recommendations based on that. I mean, I can definitely tell you it would happen at Paxton Center for that classroom. Talked about trying to be responsible. We didn't just say we need additional teachers. If we could reduce a section at a school because the numbers didn't support it, we did that as well. And so these are 4 classrooms that we said, you know what, we have too many teachers in this school. We're going to reduce it by 1 because they'll still be pretty much in line with the class size recommendations. And so I'm just sharing that. So again, it's not that we're just saying give us more teachers and pretending that we don't have resources elsewhere. We're really trying to make sure we're doing it on both ends. We had a recommendation for an English learner teacher. That position's out there. Was talking about, if there were clear inequities. Right now, we're not meeting the requirements or recommendations by DESE in terms of those kids being serviced. Right now, we're able to provide 387 hours of service time. The DESE recommendation is 473 for 131 students. And so if we were able to add a teacher, that help us close the gap of 86 hours by about half. It won't get us all the way there, but it'll be significant in putting us towards that goal. And so that's why we're making that recommendation. And then I talked a little bit about counselors and where we are in Wachusett. The Massachusetts average for guidance counselors is you have a guidance counselor for every 362 students. The national average is you have 408 students to every guidance counselor. Right now, our average in Wachusett is 539 to every counselor. If we were able to add those 2 additional counseling positions, our new ratio in Wachusett would be 440 to 1. And so it'd be significant progress more towards where we would want to be to support our students in school. Just to share this, I think, and historically this might have been the case, Wachusett's changed a lot in the last 10 years in terms of staffing, and moving forward in the future, it's one thing I'm hoping to share with people so you can see what we're doing in terms of our FTEs and kind of where that trend goes. One of the things I think people a lot of times think we're very administrator heavy. We really aren't. Our average, and again, this is all from DESE, it's right on their reporting page. Our average is 163 students to one administrator. Our DART peer average is 121 to 1. Our boarded districts, so that takes our 5 towns and every town that touches us around, their average is 117 to 1, and the state average is 100 to 1. I'm certainly not advocating for 100 to 1. I'm probably not even advocating for our DART peer average of 121 to 1. I am just trying to point out that right now we have very much skeletal support. And for a district this large, I think we have to start looking at some of those positions. And so I talked about, that we had gotten requests from principals and department heads, and this is just a slide of all the positions we did not put in this budget. And I'm really just sharing it because I think I'm trying to say that, yes, I understood we asked for a fair amount of positions, but we also said a no to a lot of requests. And I would share with you the reason why we said no to a lot of these requests, because I don't know where it would stop. I can't tell you why I might approve what Sean did over here, but he would want a sped teacher and a health teacher. Well, right now, if Sean got a health teacher, we don't have health teachers anywhere else in the district. So that's something that we really need to look at and say, how can we, is there interest? Is it best practice, and how can we get health teachers into the system, not just add them to one school and have health at one school but not at the other ones. Same thing with a special education teacher. Do I think we need more special education teachers? Probably, but until we have a model that we know we're going towards, it doesn't make sense just to throw resources at things. We have to have a plan, and it has to be a plan that we can do in all of our schools to make the district better. It can't just be like, it really, when I came into the district, and we're still this way, you can't have like 13, different schools operating as separate communities that do things differently. We really need to become aligned. But I think this is just a slide just to let you know, there were things we said no to quite a bit.
My turn. Thank you for having me. So I just wanted to go through the process that I used to develop the budget so that you had an understanding that there was some process involved. So the first part of this assessment calculation is, so I did it a little differently than what they've done in the past. I started with what the foundation budget was going to be that's prepared through the state. So we start with the required minimum local contribution and then add to it Chapter 78, and that's your foundation budget. Adding to that some additional other revenues that first come from the state, the Chapter 71, which is transportation, and then our charter tuition reimbursement, and then we estimate what we're going to get in a Medicaid reimbursement. Was a little conservative on that because some Medicaid requirements and reporting requirements are changing, so we don't know quite how that's going to affect us. We actually anticipate we're going to even receive more than $750,000 this year, so I'm anticipating that we may get some additional revenue there. And then I just left actually interest and miscellaneous at what it was last year. Kind of ran out of time, so I went from there. So then after that, that's when the rest gets broken down, but based on the regional agreement by percentage. So you can see the town's percentage of the rest of the non-discretionary expenditures. So transportation, and that's net of that transportation reimbursement, is going to be a total of almost $6.4 million. We're in our second year of an extension for AA transportation, for our regular ed transportation. So that'll be something we'll have to renew for FY25 or go out to bid for FY25. And then that transportation piece, I actually, special ed transportation, I went based on what we actually expended this year because it was like way off from what we've budgeted previously. Then our debt service, that hasn't changed. That actually is coming down. It reflects 2 high school bonds and a Jefferson oil remediation. So there's the remainder of that debt service. So after all that, I kind of stopped there, and that's when I switched gears and I went to figure out, all right, what is it going to cost to operate the district? And that's where I came up with $116,208,797. That minus the other, the foundation budget plus the non-discretionary piece left us with a difference of $19,298,663. That's the discretionary piece that you used to call as operational. So then I took that worksheet and flipped it into the worksheet that you got going the opposite direction to see where the assessments were. By the way, these were approved by the school committee. It was approved on March 9th. March 6th. Sorry, March 9th, 6th. Am I mixing my dates up? I think it was March 9th. I think it was March 9th, to be honest with you, yeah. So anyway, so that's to give you your assessment, and we'll go over that in a minute. So then I broke down each of the appropriations. So this is just a definition. Probably the two that are a little difficult to understand what they are is the pupil services includes athletics, health, and student activities, and then the other operating costs. That includes school choice tuition expenses being paid out along with charter school tuitions being paid out. So that's what's in those. After our budget hearing, I heard a lot of people like, can you give us something line by line? So you have a draft of this, the line by line budget. So that was what I built the budget on. I looked at FY22 and 23 actual expenditures. Let me just go through. Starting with salaries and stipends, what I did is I pulled down everybody that worked in the district and did an analysis of where they would level up within their bargaining unit. So looked at those who would get the extra year and those who might be got higher education and moving to a different lane. And took everyone who was working, didn't just add 3% to what was budgeted the previous year. Then I also took, there's a salary reserve line in there, I think it's by 2 million something. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't tell you, but if you look in, it's, actually, I think it was 4 million last year, and it's like 2 million this year. It's fine, it's fine. So I took cost of living adjustments, the additional positions that we were adding, teachers who had some retirement benefits coming to them that we knew were retiring, they have some sick time buyback. So that was in that salary reserve line, so that we had some salaries set aside for those adjustments.
What did you use for your COLA adjustment?
I can't really tell you that because we're still bargaining with those units, so we threw a number in there.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough?
Fair enough.
Projected new positions are included in that.
Yeah, and the new position. So it is like, so that's everyone. The benefits and insurance. Our insurance went up 8.78%. Worcester County Retirement was another big one that went up 6.7%, along with some other insurance costs that increased as well. Our instructional support, that includes that district textbook plan to replace the $440,000 of it is to replace that Font and Pinellas program to bring in that new ELA program. So that also includes our technology and copier leases in there as well. So that did go up a good amount. Our operations and maintenance, that increase, most of it is because of some monies that we put aside to do some improvements. The ECC, we're doing new carpeting at the ECC and doing a generator for the ECC building. We lost power. Jim didn't talk about this, and usually he does. We lost power, and it loses power and connectivity for the district. We only have like an hour backup for that. So with the tree going down, we realized we pulled the whole district down when that happened. So that was that. Our pupil services, that looks like a big increase. It's just such a small number. $15,000 is not going to make or break the budget. The special ed tuitions are not going down. We received circuit breaker money from the state for our special ed needs. What happened was I took monies that were being paid out of special ed out of salaries. We had a bunch of salaries, and I threw that back into salaries to use the money, the circuit breaker money, to offset our special ed costs, but they are not going down by any stretch of the imagination. So we're offsetting with our circuit breaker funding on that line. The other operating cost, again, that was our school choice and our charter tuitions that are going out. So those are increasing a small amount. Our transportation, already like that's going up, used exactly like I said. What it cost us this year actually in special ed transportation, our out of district transportation went up pretty significantly compared to FY22 even. And then our increase, I think the increase for the AA transportation was like 9-point-something% in and of itself. And then our debt service has pretty much remained stable. So I actually, like I said, took and looked at part of the spending freeze was I asked all departments to make sure, all the schools, to make sure that they went out and ordered so that the monies that whatever they needed for the end of the year, so those monies were encumbered, so I would have a clear indication or a clearer indication of where we were going to end up at the end of the year. So if they didn't have those monies encumbered, to get that done by February 1st, so that when I was doing this, that I'd have a clear picture of where we were at. Now they're just kind of not spending. This is just a chart to just show that most of our spending is salary and benefits, 80%. So that's where the biggest piece of our puzzle is, or our pie. So we were very lucky. A lot of towns and districts did not get an above 10% increase on our Chapter 70 funding. So that was huge. That was a huge increase. Same with the transportation reimbursement, that we were over 10% there as well. The tuition aid, that increase, again, I'm not sure how many students were coming in versus going out, but we had an increase there as well. So the Medicaid, again, I was a little bit conservative with the $125,000. And then, as Jim said earlier, I can't promise excess and deficiency until we actually have that certified. So that was a budget item that we don't have at this point.
Michelle, we've now seen excess and deficiency, or seen it or have it mentioned 4 or 5 times. And I think Steve made the point, or you made the point, it's not going to be certified on April 15th, whether or not it's 2 weeks later or a month later. And I know that the math is not simple, but in simple math, if the 850,000 gets recertified, what does that translate in terms of relief for the town of Paxton?
You'd be under 4%, the 4% increase. So you, what are you at, 4.1? Can I go to the next?
4.18.
You're at 4.8, you'd be under the 4%. Or right at 4%.
4.18.
4.18, oh, so you'd be, well, so Holden and well, Rutland will never get to 4%. That just will never happen. But Holden and, let me go to the slide with where everyone is at. Okay.
It's page
So,
38.
yeah, so, that's your minimum local. You'd be well under the 4, actually. So the Holden and Sterling, they would be right at 4%. So you'd probably be, I don't know, I had the math at one point, but you'd be like probably
3.5.
not quite 3.5, maybe 3.6, 3.7, but it'd bring you down. And I think I only needed $650,000 because it's minimizing that discretionary spending.
Right.
So the other stuff's staying the same. So when you get a little bit and you bring that 19 million down, it makes a big difference in
So
that
then the follow-up
percentage.
question, what's the movability of the 850? Can the 850 be risks that it's only 750, or could it be 950?
Yeah, well,
We got to see what we certify at.
the hard thing is, we won't know what that number is until we close out FY22. And so I think it's based on, I would think you projected it based on what it typically has been, based on our revenues coming in. We did a lot better last year in
Yeah,
particular.
we had some
Medicaid.
additional revenue last year, so that's why we kind of think we're going to have, excess. And the overspending will be solved out of revolving accounts. So,
Not, because this year we're hoping we're not going to have any overspending, but the 1.65 million, that was earmarked out of revolving accounts, and so excess and deficiency shouldn't be part. We don't need that money to balance any of the over expenditures from FY22. Those transfers have been approved by school committee out of revolving accounts. So.
Okay.
yeah.
So if the E&D gets certified and you get, what I think I heard you say was the 850 is probably a modest assumption based upon the fact that you got that in 23. It would be less than 4%, say it's 3.75. Does that 3.75 increase then net to your desired target of student ratio in Paxton from 30 to 20? Is that what happens with that increase? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not
You
sure.
had a,
Yeah, that's
That's
already included in the
It's already
budget.
included.
Yeah.
All
that's
those,
what I'm saying.
they're all
It's in the
included,
budget.
yep.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
That would
The
be
assessment.
certified that could happen.
Assessment.
It would, it
Alright.
would still be at that spot, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not affecting what's been presented.
Just checking. All right, follow-up question.
Sure.
Based upon, we're in 9 months of fiscal year 23. Actuals to what was budgeted, how are you tracking?
We were doing actually well. I haven't checked in like probably 10 days now, but we.
Okay, say 2 weeks ago, how did you think
2
we were
weeks ago,
doing?
we were about, oops, I don't know what I did there. We were about 1.6 million into to the good.
Oh, good.
That's
So,
good news.
Yeah,
Yep.
Thank you.
yeah. All right, so
Need a little bit of good
I'm gonna
news.
move along
I
here.
was gonna say, yeah, we could use good
Could
news.
use a little bit of good news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you know what, that changes all the time,
Of
you know,
course.
that changes
We
all the time
understand.
too. So
Right,
I
it's-
don't,
It's depending on.
right now, I
the
don't
time.
anticipate overspending. Who knows what can happen between
Understood.
now and then.
Okay,
So anyway, the reasons behind a lot of the increase, like Jim says, is some of our budget was poorly planned in the previous years. You can look at the sheet of FY22 and to 23 and see the budget line items are exactly the same, or they're an exact percentage of what they, an exact percentage of 3% on all the salaries. It just wasn't good process whatsoever. So that's one of the reasons. Some other reasons which everyone is struggling with is our increased utility costs, our increased health insurance, our increase, everything is costing more, just in general, so we're all struggling with that. So we're just trying to give you a more accurate definition of what it looks like for us to just operate. We are calling it like a level service, where we want to provide the services that we've been giving to students. We're not asking for above and beyond that, even though we're asking for more positions. It's part of keeping class sizes to what they should actually be.
Michelle, you gave me an example when we spoke previously of the copier lease. Could you give that example again? Because I think that really helps to highlight exactly what the budgeting errors were in the prior years, and what you're facing, and how your deep dive that you've done now has actually helped with budgeting.
So is that, like, we had two accounts that we were budgeting for copier leases. I can tell you even when I was looking at the facility stuff, what they did is they just pumped up what we would pay for oil and electricity, thinking, oh, that'll take care of all the other line items. So it's just hard to
They didn't look at the actual cost, right?
They never looked at the actual costs. Never looked, at least in the last couple of years, what I can see. I mean, there were even small items, you can look at that stuff, and I didn't clean it up, by the way. There, like, if you looked at the charter and tuition aid on one of those, a lot of our problems is we didn't even have numbers for expenditures in there. They're in there now because of getting the information into Munis, but they even have a number in there for FICA taxes. We don't pay into FICA taxes. So it was just like, okay, they even just kept adjusting it from year to year. Like I said, I left some things because that's what I had to work with. Hopefully we'll just see that cleaned up. So we're kind of still flying blind too with FY23. One of the things we had, one point was that $1.2 million in substitute costs, and they budgeted for $600,000 this year. So, okay. They actually, I think, went down from the previous year.
They
And it
did.
wasn't the random 3% thing, it was just we're gonna do this amount of money. I don't know why, I don't have any rhyme or reason for where they came up with that information. So, it's a little challenging, but I feel that I've taken the time and I can at least stand by the numbers that I'm putting in front of you. I couldn't just add percentages to budgets, so. Do you want to talk about the,
I'm happy to. And so,
yeah, he's more familiar with the.
So I apologize, because an earlier iteration of the budget presentation had your current security systems as part of that. And it's because really in all the other towns, we've modeled what happened here in Paxton and have made recommendations for similar systems at all of our schools. And so I'm going to come back and speak on Thursday night about a recommendation, and this was made by a school committee, and I can talk to you too a little bit about the grant programs. What we're recommending for Paxton is the last 2 years there's been an issue where the kitchen doesn't have proper ventilation in the hood. And the reason why that's important in part is right now they're not getting rid of the exhaust the way they need to, so there's an air quality thing there, but it's also, there's steam built up, and so if you go in the kitchen, there's a lot of condensation, and it's really a health hazard. But until it gets upgraded, one of the hard things is money can't go towards certain types of equipment, because if you don't have the proper ventilation, you can't have upgrades in some of the systems. I think the other thing that's kind of tough right now for the kids at Paxton Center is it limits your menu, because if you can't have certain things that are able to, cook all the different options that the district may offer, they have somewhat limitations. The cost estimate for that, and we have 3 bids, and they're not perfect, but we have gotten 3 of them, and I can share with people on Friday, it's around a $50,000 expense. And we are, I know Mark Wild, who does a lot of the district facilities work, he's meeting with the fire department in the town, I think either tomorrow or Wednesday, because one of the things they have to figure out about the hood is whether or not it needs a fire suppression system in it, so they're doing some of that work as well. The good news about this is our hope is the district's going to be able to fund this project. But right now, we couldn't tell you 100% that we're going to be able to. And because it's a particular high level of need for Paxton Center School, it could have potentially been on our list last year as well. And so I share that, I'll let you know how we would hope to pay for it, is right now, our food services line in our budget has a decent amount of cash in it, and we're hoping to be able to spend it down. And one of the high priorities projects for the district would be this hood. And so if we're in the position we think we're going to be in at the end of the year, I think we would probably come back to the town and say, thank you so much for approving the appropriation. We're going to be able to take it out of our revolving service, food services line. But we don't have 100% confidence in that, and we're trying to get into the habit of doing our due diligence and recommending capital improvement projects to the towns every year, because our schools really need it. And so we talked a little bit about the security grants, and so the governor mentioned them in August, and we didn't hear a word about them until maybe end of January, around that time frame, where they were going to become alive, which was exciting. Districts could apply for up to $150,000 total funding, and they could spread it amongst a maximum of 3 schools. Okay. Paxton had been approved, so we identified a school in Sterling, a school in Rutland, and a school in Holden. All right. Our goal is to do something there for $50,000 each. We won't know if we got them or not for another couple of weeks. We're hopeful, because I think, as somebody mentioned a little bit earlier, I think the things that you ended up spending the money on at Paxton Center are the things that the grant identifies as important expenditures and those that would fit the needs of the grant. And just some of the work we've done this year, we are trying to keep an eye on student safety. We started doing more work on Alice. We'll finish up our drills, I think, this spring, and so we'll actively be doing those drills again. We've recommitted to training the staff in that program, and so we really are trying to keep a focus on security. So we asked ourselves, okay, what can we do for the town since we only have 3 schools we can get this grant for? What could we possibly come up with for projects where we could similarly give a benefit to the towns? And this is what we've come up with for Paxton. And so I wouldn't tell you I'm at 100% confidence, but I'm pretty high that we're going to have the money to fund this project. But we're moving forward with the process just on the case that we may not be able to. And then that way we feel like we're doing for Paxton what we've been able to do through, ideally we'll be able to do through grants for Holden, Rutland, and Sterling. And then at Princeton, I think we're hoping that we might be able to get them a tractor. And so we're trying to, be good partners with all of our towns, and it's not like, oh, you get something if you're in this town and not that one. But that's why we're moving forward with this project. And the reason why we're moving forward with a capital request, and I can talk more about this on Thursday night, is because it is such a high-level need, and we're still living a little bit in wanting to be sure about where our finances sit. But I can tell you that if we have money in the account, that this is one of the very high items that we would earmark to get done. So that's the story behind that. And I apologize, I hadn't noticed until I was going back through the presentation this morning that we had security on your thing. But this is the project that was passed by school committee, I want to say in November, when we had identified projects for the different towns. Okay. And then I know we're due to have a town meeting on June 5th, and I'll see some of you, I believe, on Thursday night, but we're happy to answer any questions or your comments or whatever people feel would be beneficial.
Any questions, Kirk, Karen?
I just want to say thank you for providing all this information with such honesty, so.
I would second the honesty factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the transparency and partnership is greatly appreciated.
I think it's a tough job. You guys
I
had to
don't
be the
envy
ones to
you.
rip the Band-Aid off. And I mean, I think we've exposed now that there was a deficiency in the past, and it's not going to be easy to rebuild it, but certainly great information and good steps going forward.
And I just want to say thank you for this. I know we had spoken about this as well. We have been asking for a line item budget for years. Carol can attest to it.
Yeah,
Mark,
once in a
I'm
while
sure,
we got
will
one,
attest to it, but
then,
even when we got a line item budget, it wasn't. And this, I'm sure, for you, this is a very condensed version, but for us, this is way more detailed than we've ever gotten. So, very much appreciated. Mark?
So, Jim, I want to echo a lot of what's been said by everybody so far, and go on record. I've said it at these meetings, I've said it at Finance Committee meetings, I've said it at audit advisory meetings. The district in Paxton is fortunate to have the two of you at the helm. I feel confident that you're the two right people to move us forward and get us where we need to be, so thank you. The second thing is, you've made a compelling case of a lot of need, all profoundly supportable, and I think everybody agrees to their need, and there's need to move forward. But there's one issue that still haunts me, and that's one of your earlier slides, which is be accountable and own the mistake, of which none of it was of your making. But I am not convinced that the Business and Finance Subcommittee of the Wachusett Regional School Committee, who I personally hold accountable for the things that you've talked about, the audit for June 30th, 2021 not being done is an alarm of profound cynicality in terms of what possibly could be wrong that you can't get an audit done, followed by the fact that you have now disclosed huge holes in the budget process. It begs the question, where was that particular subcommittee? And I know placing blame is not going to get us through this particular process, but I'm not convinced that they've stepped up and held themselves accountable and owned this particular mistake. They've basically passed it on to the 5-member towns by just giving an increase beyond the 4% that all the towns had asked for, like the errors never occurred, there's nothing they can do about it, here's the new budget, move on, nothing to see here. I think until they step forward and take some ownership, that's going to be nagging at a lot of us in terms of to try to get you the budget that you need to provide this service to our town and to the students. But that's inexcusable for that to have happened under the watch of that particular subcommittee. And I am thankful that Scott's here as a member of the school committee, and I want to quickly point out who was not a member of that subcommittee. But thank you for reminding me that, Scott. But that's a problem. And they've just Tefloned it, deferred it to you like it wasn't their issue, and until they speak up and take ownership of it, that's going to be difficult for a lot of us. So, sorry for the speech, but I've been observing this since the first Wachusett Regional School District Audit Advisory Committee, and Jim, hopefully you'll agree, there were 3 new members that were in that room for 10 minutes that realized the significance of this problem. 3 new members in 10 minutes, and a subcommittee just walked by it or was asleep at the switch for 2 or 3 years. That's a problem. That's got to be fixed, quite frankly. So, sorry for the speech, but that's bothersome to me. The only salvation is the 2 of you doing the wonderful job and the detailed job and the transparent job that you've done, and you are the change agents and the fixers, but you inherited a problem that probably shouldn't have existed, certainly for as long as it did. So, I'll stop there.
All right, any other questions?
If I might, Madam Chair, I commend you on the class size work and going back to the district-wide policy. I know it was discussed earlier, but I find that alarming, those high numbers, so kudos on that. So I'd like to continue that. Also, the capital we need for this Paxton Center School, I know the last couple of years has been free lunch, and that's been great. The Fed picked it up, the state now has picked it up. I know in the district I work in, school lunch balances are high because of that, so the balances are high, and I think that's what you had in mind.
Yep.
So I do hope that we can fund that through that revolving account, because there's a lot of flexibility there with those balances up. So I encourage you to really look at that, and so that maybe we don't have to see it at the town meeting.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're hoping to do.
Okay. And then just one other question, it's a line item specific question, if that's all right, Julia?
Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
So on the first page, on the front sheet, about halfway down, it just was a lot of variations and total payroll salary reserve. And it just had a lot of fluctuation. Now, maybe it just you reclassified things as the new finance director, so that's what I'm guessing. You put things where they should have been, things like that, but the budget went from 1.5 million to 4 million, and now you have it at 1.9 million. Just if you could give a brief explanation for that, I'd appreciate it.
I can tell you what's in the 1.9 million
Okay.
that I put there. That is the,
As the others.
well, I can tell you what that 4 million is too by my guess. They made salaries go up an exact 3%, so they 3%ed the budget lines and said, all right, let's see, we want this whole number to be 3%, so we'll throw that in there, because I don't know what that 4 million is, but it's just a factor to get it all to 3%. But the 1.9 million, that is our cost of living adjustments for unnegotiated contracts. We're in contract negotiations with I'm going to say all but one bargaining unit. Our new positions, so the new positions that we have planned, and then there were a few teachers who are retiring that get a benefit for sick time buyback benefit. So that's what's in there.
All right. Thank you.
That's how it should be.
Imagine that, we actually budgeting, so that's good. All right,
You,
yes, go ahead, Jeff.
To the select board or the vice chair of the finance committee, just quick question. I know you're formulating the town budgets. By the way, Jeff Kent, 899 Pleasant Street. You're formulating the town budgets. You provided the school committee a percentage of what you felt was feasible to support both town services and the district. With that said, you're still in the budget formulation stage. do we have do you project a deficit, number one? And number two, do you project, if we want to do everything we want to do, in addition to supporting this school district budget, of having to do a Prop 2.5 override?
I think that question got passed to me.
Of course it did.
I'd like to thank you very much.
You're
I
very
love you, brother.
The budget deficit, as we sit here this evening, is $444,000, which includes all of the Wachusett Regional School District and BayPath numbers as we've all seen them this evening are included in that particular budget. So the $850,000, if it were fortuitously to come a little bit in our direction, would soften that deficit. But we still have some work to do operationally with our own departments. And I think it's too soon to speak as to whether or not a Proposition 2.5 override is in the cards. Everything's on the table. Some more popular than others, but everything's on the table.
Do you see a combination of cutting our budget and going back to the district and saying you need to help us?
Yes.
I will add that the committee, under Mark's guidance, has requested every one of us to submit our ideas around required budget adjustments to mitigate and use only as a last minute the $250,000 override. That is not a position we are willing to take at this time, and we continue as a committee, all 7 of us, to work toward minimizing that dollar amount. And we are accepting all recommendations, and we've presented quite a few. Mark has quite a list that we've presented to him already. Unfortunately, we as a committee have not had a chance to review those yet, but we are going to be doing that soon, right, Mr. Chair?
The Finance Committee is meeting the next 4 Wednesdays, and it's a public meeting and everybody's invited.
And it'll be here, right here in this room.
And by the way, we have a vacancy if anybody's interested. Not that we're recruiting at this time.
Don't do it.
But we've taken names of those that said anything tonight.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, concerns, comments? None? All right. Thank you so much for coming in. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much, very much.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have anything else that you
No.
want to do before you close your meeting? Or you time to close it now?
We have a motion to close our Finance Committee meeting.
Seconded.
Opposed? Favor? Abstention?
Aye.
We're closed.
Excellent. All right, and then on our end, I don't believe we had any, I just need to make sure that there's no public comment. I don't believe we have anything, no correspondence. So with that, you very
I'll
well.
make a motion to close our general meeting, to open the executive session, only to close to adjourn.
So some different version of it every time, but we know what you mean. Okay, this has to be a roll call vote. So all in favor, Kurt, Carol, and I will vote aye. So we're gonna take a brief recess to allow the room to clear and
Always
everything.
mean the same though?
Yeah,
Somebody say it differently, but
It's always
it means
different.
the same.
It's just,
you don't close to adjourn.
so you adjourn so right now we're just moving into executive session. You adjourn only to end the meeting entirely, right? So right now we're just voting to move into executive session, to return to regular session, only to adjourn the meeting.
Only to close and adjourn.
You take it next time.
I should write it down for you. I used to have to write it down for one certain select board member.